All right, hey, what's up, guys? We have Kevin Orr here to talk about paranormal phenomenon, and he has had some personal experiences with paranormal phenomena, and also targeted individual experience, like in gang stalking and stuff. So, what's going on? How you doing today,
Hey, how you
Kevin?
doing, man? Thanks for having me on and welcome to my spare bedroom in my house. This is actually my I have a 7-month-old daughter at home and this is going to be her room, but right now it's the podcasting room. So
Yeah, cool. I'm also in my bedroom, so I know how it is. So, yeah, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then also your experience with like the paranormal phenomena stuff?
yeah, sure, absolutely. Um so I don't want to go like too far back. Let's just say so I'm 44 now and I struggled throughout my life with addiction issues like alcoholism and drug addiction. Um, and when I was involved in that life, I was doing really bad, but when I wasn't, I was doing very, very well. So I was raised very conservative Christian Baptist, right? I went to Liberty University, which is a very, it's a conservative Baptist college in Lynchburg, Virginia. So I had some very strong Christian upbringing and ideologies and education. So starting about, I'd say maybe 4 years ago, somewhere in there, I thought I was beginning to experience, like psychosis, right? So I began hearing voices, and this is nothing uncommon. A lot of people, they might start hearing voices, and there's a big difference between what I was experiencing and what I hear other people, that you know so often hear voices, what they were experiencing. So these voices that when they first started off, they would almost just narrate, almost like you're tapping into like, a conversation between two guys, like you're just hearing somebody talk about current events that's going on in the street, and you're really just observing what you're hearing, and then it would kind of go away and then it would and then it would come back and then it would go away, and I went through this on and off stage with these voices for for years. Okay. And the relationship with these voices, like, they change over time. So what started off as just almost like a observational conversation eventually became very, oriented towards me in the present moment and speaking to me as an individual, and the voices changed over to like three permanent characters. So, for the longest time, it was just random people, whether they were in my past or my present or as part of my long term memory. Like I would hear, landlords or old bosses or anything like that. And then what happened was there was three main voices, two males and a female. And once they entered into the picture, they've been there to stay. Um, so like I said, when we started, I have a 7-month old at home. And I was having a difficult time when I found out that my girlfriend was getting pregnant. This was 16 months ago now. Um, I was having a hard time, stop drinking and stop, drugging and I said, I got to get it together, babe. Like I really got to get it together. So I said, that's it. I'm going to check myself into a rehab. And I said, I'm doing it right this time. So that's what I did. I went through detox at Jefferson Hospital in Center City, Philadelphia. And then they transferred me to a program called Self Help in Northeast Philadelphia. All right. Now I detoxed. I'm sober, right? The drugs are out of me at this point. I'm not hearing voices. I'm like, all right, I'm just going to do this program and get through it. And then I'm in my room in the, it's in a one man room in the rehab, and one of the voices come back, and the voice says very, I mean, audibly, as if you can hear me now. The voice says, "Are you ready?" And I just remained silent. And the next thing I know, my entire room was turned into a planetarium. And, it didn't matter if my eyes were shut or my eyes were open. It was as if there was a projection on everything. And it was stars, planets, galaxies, um, like very complex geometrical plasmoid type objects going in and out. And then a series of faces, human faces, non-human faces, some that look like hockey masks, and scenery, a lot of like mountain ranges and backdrops. Um, and I remember just laying there like, and in that moment when something like that is happening to you, and you know that it's coming from a very metaphysical place, and you're wondering like, did I lose my mind? Like, did I actually lose my mind? Is this what schizophrenia is? Because I'm unmedicated, undiagnosed. I think very logically and very, very clearly, and very realistically. So when something like this was happening to me in that state of mind, obviously I'm reaching for, an agnostic explanation, right? Um, and there wasn't one. So I wound up going through the rehab, and the voices, they stayed with me. And what happened from that point forward was what would be described as like a exposure therapy. And what fear exposure therapy is it's a form of cognitive behavior therapy, where an individual is introduced to or exposed to his deepest fears, usually in a safe manner and in a very slow manner. Like there's just a slow inclination into these fears, and that's what happened. So, and it's just to give you a few examples of what that is. So my biggest fears were like fear of other people's opinions. All right, I lived, which is known as FOPO. Like I lived my life up until that point trying to give this pretentious version of myself in hopes that you would accept me. Because if you could accept me, then I could accept myself, because that's how insecure I was within myself. Right. I just had to give off this presentation to the world. And if that presentation was bought, even though it was a lie, then I could be confirmed in who I was. Right. So that was, and I lived an entire life like that. As a drug addict, you're always lying about who you're with, what you're doing, why you're doing it, where you're doing it at, what time you're going to be home, where'd all the money go. Like your whole life is a lie. So a lot of rewinding have to be done. So what the voices started doing was really attacking these aspects of my character that were keeping me bound to the past, right? Because I had a very difficult time getting over things that I had done in the past, people that I had harmed, unmet obligations. So what this thing does it dredges all that stuff up from your unconscious, from your personal unconscious, and forces you to face it. Whether it's a reenactment of the voices of people that you've had conflict with, or it's just the constant badgering of that which you feel most insecure about yourself. And it can be very, very, very negative. I mean, I'm talking weeks on end of somebody. Just imagine somebody on your shoulder for weeks on end, just going, "You're a piece of shit. You're such what a loser you are." Really, you think people are like, and it just goes and then it'll stop, and then they'll switch up on you. Man, you're the greatest guy in the room. Everybody loves you. So it's this constant dichotomy of being torn between the world's biggest piece of shit or the greatest person on the planet. You're the ugliest person on the planet. You're the best looking guy on the planet. Everybody loves you. Everybody hates you. This, that, yes, no, black, white, fat, skinny. And you're just split. You're literally, if you're in, if so, the point is like the way that I analyze this, because for as long as I fed into the the extreme statements of both polarities, um, I was never able to find myself in the middle, right? And that's exactly what this thing does, is it throws out the polarities of life that we think about ourselves and forces you to follow through with it. And there's often an associated emotion that's placed on it. I mean, I could just be sitting there watching Netflix, and all of a sudden, and this goes beyond an anxiety or a panic attack, I would just be overwhelmed with fear. Just like the biggest amount of adrenaline and cortisol that you could imagine would just be released. And when that happens and you don't know where it's coming from, your brain often seeks an explanation outside of itself. Well, what is there in my environment to be fearful of? And a lot of people get themselves in trouble while they're going through this process because they start pointing the finger at other things that, are not bringing fear into their life. So, that's just kind of a quick explanation or introduction into, what this has been for me. And that was kind of the precursor to paranormal phenomenon eventually happening. So one of the biggest things I'll say that your mind is constantly torn with this, right? Because, and first of all, let me start off by saying this, is that there is under no circumstances at any point, once I really got into this, did I question without a shadow of a doubt that what was happening was not of me. It was in me, but it certainly was not of me. Um, and they would say things that I don't know what the hell they are. They'll say words, and I don't know what the definitions of these words are. I have to go to on Google and I have to look them up. They say people, places, and things, and I don't know who these people or places are. And I have to do a Google search to figure out what the hell they're talking about. So a lot of what is said is not a part of my long-term memory or my, memory data bank. I don't have that type of information in my head. Or they'll tell me to look things up. Like if I'm having a train of thought going, trying to figure something out, they'll give suggestions. And it's like, it's like, but that was like those little things like that. That was like very helpful in me because you really do, you pull your mind apart in the beginning of this saying, is this just me going crazy? Or is this something that is happening to me? Is the brain really capable of just doing this on its own? Um, so kind of get into some of the paranormal stuff. Unless you have any questions about any of that before I continue.
Uh, no, it's fine. You can just you can keep going if you
Okay.
want.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So, as if that, that initial encounter, with this wasn't paranormal enough. Um, so probably one of the bigger things, apparitions. So with one of the latest ones, I was laying in bed and a blue apparition appears and takes its finger and runs it from my forehead down my nose. Actually, it was a finger and a thumb, and touched my lips. And like actually, like I felt as if it was putting something into my mouth. And and I don't know if that was symbolic of like it was taking something from my forehead and placing it into my mouth, or but there's an actual touch with this. It's not just visual, there's a vibratory touch with it. It's almost like taking an electric toothbrush and running it down the center of your face is exactly what that feels like. Um, the vibrational work in general, a lot of it, so a lot of people that are targeted individuals will refer to the energy that they feel as a directed energy weapon because a lot it's it can be torturous. I've been poked, prodded, zapped, stung. You get precision like itches, like itch spots, like on random parts of your body. And depending on what your belief is towards this, like people that are going through a kundalini awakening or something like that, they'll say that it's the earth's natural energy trying to work its way up through your chakras and you have a blockage in your chakra. um but some of this stuff, man, it feels very malicious. Like it just, so I remember again one night I'm laying there and it had been quiet with the voices, and then one of the voices again, they were like almost like an apologetic, like I'm sorry that we're going to do this. And I was just like, oh, what the hell now? And dude, I got hit with um I so it was like a high pitched ringing that elevated to a point where I was blinded. All I could see was white. It was like a white light, and it felt like inside of my head was ringing, and it was pushing against my skull. And I was just, you're paralyzed in that moment. You're completely just neutralized. You can't move. You can't do anything. So they did that for maybe like 10 seconds and then came down with it. And that was the one and only time that they've ever done that. And, I don't know if they did that to kind of show me like, look, we do have this capability of doing this and we just choose not to. If it was some sort of thing to try to keep an individual subservient. Um, yeah, I don't know exactly what that was all about, but it was humbling. It was actually very, very humbling to know that that is a possibility at any time, once you're glued into with this. Um, so all right, so that was another one. And then lately, I'd say within the past 3 months, it's been visitation by orbs, white orbs about the size of a tennis ball that just go flying by. I mean, they're just doing record speed, absolute record speed. And that's often associated with a bright flash in the white sky. So if I go out of my house at nighttime and meditate, I have a back deck on the back of my house, and I'll lay in the hammock and I'll look up. Usually there's a bright flash of white light in the sky, like the sky has taken my picture and there's a flash bulb going off. And then in usually within the next 5 minutes, there are orbs that fly overhead. You know, one, two, three, and they're usually always white. And recently I've seen a blue one. You know, they're never like I said, they're never any more the size than a tennis ball or a softball, something like that. But yeah, I mean that's so these things, so it's like, all right, so I would say that throughout this entire experience, I've always been torn between three possibilities because in my head it can only be three possibilities. It can either be 100% humans, right? And this is some sort of MK Ultra behavioral modification experiment thing that they're doing on humans, right? Or it's non-human intelligence, right? Which is a very umbrella term, because that could be anything. That could be spirits, that could be angels, demons, that could be aliens, extraterrestrials, interdimensional entities. That's a very large umbrella term. Or it's both, or it's a conjunction of the both, or humans have done something behind the scenes that have opened this up for a lot of people. Because as time went on and I really started going online to research what the heck this is going on with me, I come to find out that I am far from alone. Far from alone. Not only far from alone, but the events that I went through and the sequence of events that I went through are happening to a lot of people all around the world, right? Um, yeah. So, I mean, that's the whole story in a nutshell, and kind of where I'm at now with this. And yeah, and this thing got me sober, and I've been sober since I went into rehab, and that was July of 2023. So like once my mind was opened up to the awareness of observation, it was like I no longer had a need for my own personal integrity. My integrity almost became codependent, you know, um, which sounds very oh man, it sounds very, very like submissive, but I guess I really needed that in the beginning to know that I wasn't alone, to know that what I was thinking, what I was doing, how I was behaving, um, how my actions made repercussions into the world. Like I really needed to know that those behaviors were not alone. And that it worked for me. It really worked for me, that codependent integrity. But then as time goes on and like things really start to take an often negative turn with this thing, you're like, oh man, I don't want this sort of accountability. Like these guys can be brutal. Um, yeah, but so yeah, I mean, don't let me keep rambling on. If you have any questions or
Yeah, well, what do you mean by accountability for one?
okay, so all right, so you figure your brain, right, or your mind, it's this place of absolute solitude, right, where you can think anything you want, envision anything that you want without persecution, right? Without repercussions, without consequences. There's zero consequences for any thought or anything that you envision. And when something like this happens and you start hearing voices, and what they're doing is actually commenting on your thoughts and on what you're envisioning, well, now your thoughts and your imagination is no longer alone, right? And and it sounds so like to describe it to anybody now, and I always try to put myself in other people's shoes, like hearing this, and they're like, yeah, guy sounds like psychosis, like he sounds like he lost his mind, and you know, but what it is it's an actual dialogue with like fluidity, especially in the beginning, and eventually what happens is that you begin to hear yourself in your own inner dialogue, right? So even when you're not having thoughts, you're tuned into some eternal conversation that's going on between you and these other entities, as if there's just always this eternal dialogue that's constantly going on in the minds of people, right? So once I became aware of that, and what the term that I like to use is aware of observation, right? So once I became aware of the fact that I was constantly being observed, that my mind was always under observation. Um, that put me in check. You know, it was the same as like when Charlie Sheen tried to get sober and he hired a bodyguard to be with him 24/7 to make sure he didn't mess up. It's the same exact concept. Like I knew that I wasn't alone. It's the same reason that a Christian will believe in an omnipresent, omniscient God. You know, they believe that there's always a God watching over them at all times, and this gives that person integrity. I didn't have that, but this gave that to me in that, in that moment. Like I no longer felt as if I was alone. Now, a big part of this, the targeted individual experience is what you and I were talking about before we started recording, is gang stalking. So a lot of people will experience and document being gang stalked, right? Which is when a group of people harass the shit out of them, right? And this is just, in public. They'll follow them down the street. They're knocking on the walls. They're honking horns as they go by all hours of the night. Um, I can't, I would never say that gang stalking doesn't happen because it does. It most certainly does. I've seen the videos that it does. I've watched the interviews with this woman who lives in Baltimore and she runs like a rehab that's their technique to get people into rehab to better themselves. That they gang stalk and harass the hell out of them until they go into the rehab. So I can never say that that does not occur, physical gang stalking. But for me, it was all in my head, right? Um, when the voices in your head and when you're in a heightened state of paranoia and fear and the voices in your head are saying that person's following you, you tend to believe it, and then you think the person behind you is following you, or you think your neighbors are out to get you, or so there's a difference between believing that you're under observation and knowing that you're under observation. For as long as I only believed that I was under observation, I sought an explanation outside of myself, right? Because my mind became aware that it wasn't alone. It became aware that it was being observed. But with no foreseeable observer, without knowing where this was coming from, my mind sought an explanation outside of itself. And the unfortunate reality of that is that your neighbors, your family, your friends, and your loved ones get the brunt of that psychosis, right? It's not until you actually come to grips that it's your mind under observation, not your body, that you can move out of that gang stalking thing. So at least that's how it was for me. Because for as long as I truly 100% did not believe that everything that was occurring in my mind constantly sought an explanation outside of itself, usually in very fearful, angry, manner.
Yeah, so the gang stalking thing, I mean, that's not actually happening, right? It's all in their head, right? Or is it like you said you saw videos of it actually, people actually kind of like stalking the
It's
person?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back and forth. It really does. It really goes back and forth. Some of the videos that people post, I'm looking at it, I'm like, how is this person harassing you, dude? Like, you're harassing them by holding a camera up in their face. Like, leave that person alone. And then some of them I watch, like, there is cars going up and down the street, going around the block honking, like doing a noise campaign, just trying to piss this person off. And I mean, that can almost be misconstrued as bullying, but that is a physical form of gang stalking. But a lot of people I speak to, in fact, I would say most people I speak to, and I'm included in this group, um, is that it all happened entirely within their own minds because they haven't quite switched over from thinking that the observation is happening out, to their body and not to their mind. Because as long, it's like that paranoia, you think somebody's watching you, you're going to look around. But you got to move past that and realize that there's nobody there watching you, but your mind is not alone, you know? And which is, it sounds crazy. The way that I describe it sounds crazy. But if you can look at it like this, why does prayer work? Right? Why does meditation work? Who are these entities that people are seeing when they go on DMT experiences? Um, why did Carl Jung have one of his classifications for the three parts of the brain as the collective unconsciousness, right? So he broke the brain down into three parts, right? He had the personal ego, the personal unconscious, and then the collective unconsciousness, which is the part of the brain that is connected to everybody, right? And I think what happens is for a lot of people that go through trauma or excessive substance abuse or accumulated guilt that they can't seem to resolve, right? And they're stuck tethered to the past, and arrested development has occurred. the veil between the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious, it rips open and you're exposed to things that normally the normal person is not exposed to. Because it's my belief that all of us are tied into this, right? Because I speak to people all over the world, all over, I mean, literally Australia, France, Portugal, Spain, South America, South Africa, India, Canada. I mean, everywhere. I speak to people all over the world that are
Like
experiencing the same. What's that?
different languages. Like they're literally
Here,
speaking to you in different languages, or just with an accent, or
here's the crazy story. I'll get into that, but we're all experiencing the same procedural event. Now, there's another guy, to answer your question. There's a guy whose name is Peter, and he runs a Reddit community called OTIR. It's Objective Targeted Individual Research. And I did an interview with him about maybe about 3 or 4 weeks ago and got his whole testimony. And the fascinating part about his testimony, so he's Russian and he moved from Russia to Italy. Okay. And the experience started happening to him while he was living in Italy. Now, when he moved to Italy, he didn't speak Italian. He speaks English and he speaks Russian, but he didn't know Italian at all. Well, he starts hearing voices while he's there and starts going through the same sort of fear exposure therapy thing that I went through, doing this back and forth pull thing, but it's in Italian. So he's got Google Translator. He's trying to translate everything, and he has a book. It's this thick of everything that was written out in Italian that he had to translate into Russian to understand it. And it's the same exact thing that everybody else is going through. So that part I have a very difficult time, wrapping my head around. Now some people that only speak English, they'll hear people in their head speaking a different language, so then they have to decipher it. So, I don't know exactly what it is that we're tapped into. And the only really truly honest thing that I can say, as far as who the source is or what the origin of this is I don't know. I really don't know. I don't expect myself to know, because this thing is very it'll trick the hell out of you. Like they can almost pretend to be anything that you imagine them to be. If you want to believe that they're demons, they'll be demonic. If you want to believe that they're the CIA, well, they'll be the CIA for you and drive you into a paranoid delusion. If you want to believe that they're angelic and that what this is a good thing, then you'll seek the good things in it, and that'll be, it'll go that route for you. Um, it's a very fluid relationship that is reflective to the individual, you know. Um, yeah, so trying to think like some other good. I mean, stop me there if I'm rambling on or
yeah, I'll just ask a few questions. Well, first of all, like I guess it was like 10 or 15. I have OCD anxiety,
okay.
and so I'll like just focus on like anything can come into my head, and it's like I might just focus on it, and usually it's fear, anxiety, and so about like 10 or 15 years ago, or probably about maybe now like 20 years ago, I just started worrying about like the worst possible scenarios, and I like literally believed it that like this was going to happen to me, or this could happen to me, or I was going to do something like I didn't want to do. It was almost like out of my control,
Yeah.
and was really just freaked out, and I didn't know what was going on. I went to a therapist and he said you have OCD, and then once I knew it was OCD, it's kind of like I'm able to like manage it more, but it's like still obviously there. So I guess like
Right.
my point with that is kind of like I mean, I don't want to say what you're going through can happen to anybody, but this potentially could happen to anybody. Like, it's not like it's has anything to do with you or it's like your fault or anything. It's just like this type of thing I think could happen to anyone and at any time. So even if you think like you're, um, oh, this type of thing will never happen to me, it's like I kind of look at it as like, well, it could. You never know.
Right.
Um, and so I totally like empathize with what you're saying, and I also totally believe what you're saying. I'm not like a I don't necessarily like up until I mean I don't really believe in like paranormal phenomenons, and like I
Yeah.
tend to like kind of like push out conspiracy theories or whatever, like CIA type stuff. So
Yeah.
like in my mind it would probably all be kind of like coming from inside your head. But then when you said stuff about like speaking other languages or like telling you things that like you didn't even know of, and you literally Googled it, and then it was
Right.
real, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that type of thing almost seems like you would be able, with people like you, for people studying this type of stuff, it almost seems like if it said something to you that you didn't know what it was and you wrote it down or whatever, and then you looked it up and you showed them, or even like a different language or something, if you're like, it almost seems like there would be some way to, like, if there is anything paranormal going on, it seems like they would be able to figure that out. Um, right? I mean, so it sounds like you do think something paranormal is actually going on. You don't think it's like all just in your inside your own head. You think it's actually beings outside of you, not within you, right?
I think so. At this point, I'll say this. I think that this is something that all of us are tapped into. Okay. So, um, a lot of dream manipulation occurs with this occurrence as well, and lucid dreaming. And I mean, I've had dreams since this started happening where there's no difference. Like, there's no difference between that dream reality and my awake reality. Okay. So, all right. So here's a good example. Have you ever like, and a lot of people experience this, either as you're waking up or as you're falling asleep, you're engaged in a conversation. Maybe like you hear a conversation going on and you're still in tune with that conversation, and then you wake up and you're like, man, what the heck was that? Like you've never had that happen to you at all.
I think, well, I mean, I don't know about necessarily like still in the conversation, but stuff has happened in the dream where you wake up and you still feel like it's kind of happening, maybe.
Right, right, right.
Yeah.
So so I'll have a lot of dreams, and I know this. All right, so think about like your dream states, right? When I'm having a dream, and it doesn't matter where I'm at. I could be on some distant beach. I could be in some like weird skyrise building. I mean, that was a recent one that all the windows were blown out and there was like wind ripping through. While I'm in these dream states, I'm not questioning why am I there? Because it takes history, it takes memory for us to not live in confusion. Like right now, I'm speaking with you, and I know that I'm supposed to be speaking with you because we had a date set up to do a podcast, and this is what we're doing right now. And I'm in my house. Like all of these things, all these associations to my past that have led up to this present moment tell me not to be confused right now. And that's how our brains work. And when I'm in a dream state, I'm speaking to people, I'm in environments, things are happening, and I'm not confused. I'm not questioning why am I with this person? Why am I here? Why am I talk like what is going on? Sometimes they're confusing, but for the most part, I don't question any of what's happening in that environment, right? And that can only be because there's already a history with that, right? So I look at a lot of the work that's being done recently by this woman. Her name is Dr. Leslie Ellis. If you get a chance, check her out. So she's a dream clinician that has done a lot of testing on people and has determined, has proven that at all times we are dreaming. Right now, you're dreaming. Right now, I'm dreaming. Right. So at all times in our heads, there is a recreation of our actual reality that we are creating to learn to help us get through this reality. Okay. But we only dip into it when we go to sleep, but it's happening all the time, right? So there is right now a whole nother version of you and a whole nother version of me inside of my head, living this recreation of how I perceive this reality, helping me get through this reality a little less fearful, a little less anxiety ridden, and a little less stressed out, right? Because look at how fear-based your dreams can be. A lot of times they're like, you're being punched in the face. I used to have dreams I was punching somebody else in the face and it wasn't phasing them at all, just, so this is happening at all times. And I think what happens with a lot of people when they experience certain traumas, or again, through certain psychedelics or certain drugs, is there's a confluence of that reality that we're creating in our brain to help us get through this one with this reality. And depending on how you perceive this actual reality, it can be an actual living nightmare when those two realities come together, right? So let's say that you're a very anxiety fearful person. Well, you have this constant nightmarish kind of a thing going on in your head that's helping you to not be so fearful in this reality. Well, then something happens and that starts to overflow into this. Well, now you're actually living in an actual living nightmare, right? But let's say that you're a very optimistic individual, right? Because now, if you look at schizophrenia cases, they can go one of two ways. Even people that are bipolar, they can go through extreme ups or they can go way down. It all depends on their perception at that present moment in time, their self perception, the way that other people perceive them, and how they perceive themselves in the world around other people. And sometimes it's way off the wall, right? So they have this recreation in their head that they're standing up on a stage and they're a rock star in front of millions of people and the world is theirs by the balls. And that's, and that's how they're living it out. And then they go into these very depressed stage. And in this recreation in their head, they're in a dark room and they're isolated and it's cold and they're damp and and then they're living that out in reality as well. So the key, that I've learned with dealing with all this is to perceive wisely, right? Perceive realistically. I began doing a lot of personal mantras because, like, again, when you're constantly torn between this and that and thinking you're the greatest thing or the worst thing, or you really have to push yourself to find yourself right in the middle. Otherwise, you'll get lost in the polarities of it all. Um, so I began doing a lot of personal mantras, very realistic self talk. All right. Because realistic self talk is non negotiable, right? So it doesn't, because the voices will contradict what you say. You can say to yourself, I'm a good person, and they'll come in and they'll say, you're a terrible person. Or they'll say, you're the best person on the planet. Or you really have to come into a place of self assuredness and self worth and security where you can say, I am exactly the person that I need to be in this present moment. Whatever this moment is calling for right now, I'm the right person for that job. These type of statements, they're non-negotiable and the voices begin to go away. And this is how I got through it. I had to push all those polarities off to the side and find myself right in the middle, almost like what the Buddha calls the middle path. Not thinking too highly of ourselves and not thinking too lowly of ourselves, thinking of ourselves exactly as we ought at this present moment in time and in relationship to our surroundings, right? Because one of the main things that I had to learn is that I am not responsible for the version of me that exists in the minds of other people. That's how I live my life. As long as the version of me that existed in your mind was good, then I could be good, right? But now I'm just relying on your perception of me from my own sense of self-worth. So, you can see that going into this, I these were the struggles that I had that I couldn't pinpoint. I couldn't put my finger on exactly what was going on. And to say that my brain just came up with these realizations and this understanding on its own is absolutely preposterous. Absolutely. I mean, to say that the brain just has this reset thing where it'll no, there's a very real program attached to our brains that is there to kind of run things, to tailor to your needs or to tailor to your wants. So
So yeah, so you definitely don't think that it's happening all inside your brain.
I think it's happening. Well, I think it's here's what's the best way to say it? Is there some mothership out there that's broadcasting a signal into my head? I highly doubt it. Are all of our brains essentially transmitters and receivers that give off a frequency? Yes. That's science. That's just facts. What are we tied into and what is tied into us? I don't know, but to say that, okay, so you have to look at it like this. Let's say that you have a radio, just a regular AM FM radio, and you dial into 94.5 and you start hearing music coming through. Is the music in your radio?
No, I get it would be in your head, right?
Yeah, well, it's three parts. It's being broadcasted from somewhere that's being picked up by a radio that you're then hearing in your ears, and then it's going in. See what I'm saying? So, but if you can look at your brain as a transmitter receiver, and if you can actually think about throughout the course of your day, how many Wi-Fi signals are going around your head right now? How many cell phone signals are going around your head? XM, Netflix, like all the, satellites just signals constantly all around us, but we don't see them, right? Now, I'm thinking that like, and this is kind of where my brain goes is there is a part of our brain that is in the unconscious that we do not remember, right? even when we wake up and we've had a dream, the dream fades. If you don't write it down, man, that dream will fade quickly. But that dream, that subjective dream, is always in relation to our objective reality, right? When what I'm saying is that what we believe to be our active imagination is actually an interactive imagination. What I'm saying is that our thoughts are never truly alone. Okay. They are being shared in some sort of a collective consciousness, as Carl Jung referred to it as, that is that can only be visited, when we sleep and check in, or can only be visited in deep states of meditation. That's another thing that brings this experience on. I've spoken to countless people that were not on drugs, had no trauma, had absolutely nothing, and began doing deep meditation work. And then boom, they start hearing voices as if they've just popped into this eternal bar lounge with people who are just communicating. And then they begin communicating with them. And then a lot of times that can become very traumatic, and you have to work through all of these voices, like, oh, the new guys in the room harp on them like a hazing. So very, very, very fascinating stuff.
Yeah, like what you're saying totally makes sense. And I've recently had some people on, like the recently had like two guys who do like astral projection on, and then
Yeah,
I had another guy on who we talked about consciousness, and he actually believes in the whole thing where it's like we are, and a lot of people believe this, like we're living in consciousness. I don't know if you
yeah.
know anything about this, but like instead of like everything being like material, like this dust really being here, it's all just conscious. We're all just living in consciousness. So, I mean, if that's the case, I could see how, you know, what you're saying totally makes sense. But I think that if you're like more of like a materialist where everything is material, then it's easy to say like it doesn't make sense or whatever. I mean, who knows what the truth is? But everything that you're saying does make sense. It doesn't sound like you're saying anything that's like just crazy or like this doesn't make any sense.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But I wanted to ask a few questions first before we maybe like move on into like the more of the paranormal phenomena type stuff. For
Okay.
one, like you mentioned doing drugs, like, and I'm not trying to say that it is the drugs, but what kind of drugs were you doing? And then also, like, do you feel like that could have, because I've heard some people say, like, if, somebody was fine and then he started doing psychedelics or
Yeah,
even
yeah.
marijuana, I think can like make people paranoid or whatever. So what kind of drugs were you doing? And do you think that that played any effect into it?
I would say the drugs. So let's say, so it started off with just typical gateway drugs, like I was smoking weed. Um, and then drinking has always been like, was always a big part of my life. And then I got into like stimulants. Okay. I got into cocaine at first, and then I would say when I was 33 is when the first time I did methamphetamine. And that seems to be for a lot of people that experience, this type of stuff, a lot of people that hear voices, there is a methamphetamine precursor. Okay. Not by far, not all, but but a lot of people. So there's something about that drug, methamphetamine, that people they'll begin to hear voices. And so it's definitely the lack of sleep, right? Because it's a stimulant and it keeps you awake. You're not sleeping appropriately. It completely drains your brain of dopamine and serotonin, leaving only adrenaline and cortisol, which is fear and paranoia, right? So even doing the smallest thing like going to Walmart to go get groceries becomes this major obstacle of fear that you have to overcome because that's just what it is. Um, so I don't know, and I don't want to say I don't ever want to say that correlation is causation, because again this can happen to anybody, and I've spoken to a lot of people that have never even seen those type of drugs, and they've gone through the same exact thing. I would say the major cause that I've seen for people, this happening to them, is some sort of an internal conflict within themselves that they can't seem to push past. It's like accumulated guilt, accumulated shame, unresolved issues from the past that are keeping you in a state of arrested development that you can't get through. Um, because to say that this is all experimental, it's been happening, the same exact thing, the same exact phenomena has been happening to people labeling themselves as targeted individuals for decades now, for decades. Um,
Or probably
and
more,
what this,
really, right? I mean, probably
what's that?
probably even longer than. I mean, it's probably happened forever, right? Unless you want to say like it's technology or something.
Well, here exactly. That's a very good point that you just brought up because it's my belief that it is our current state of technology that has brought about the targeted individual label. Because if you look at certain cases, the first documented case of schizophrenia was a guy named James Tully Matthews. Now, this was documented before there was even like radio, right? This was before Tesla, right? So these type of things weren't. Did I lose you? Hey, I think I lost you.
Yeah, or yeah. I think it's
Okay.
I think it's I think it's me. Sorry about that. If it does cut out, just wait a little bit, and it
Yeah.
should just reconnect. For some reason, it's like laggy. The connection's laggy. Like it'll work and then
Yeah.
it won't work. Let me try
Okay.
going back to the Wi-Fi and see how that goes.
Okay.
How's it going now?
Yeah, that's good.
All right. So what were you saying?
Okay. So, James Tully Matthews. So he was the first documented case of schizophrenia. And he described everything. I mean, every last little thing that a targeted individual goes through with his experience, and it's been documented. And he had a technological explanation because he couldn't, in his mind, figure out what was happening to him. Like there was just no way in his mind that this was happening through his own internal causes. So he actually drew up what is referred to as an heirloom, right? And that essentially was members of the parliament that were broadcasting thoughts into his head. And he experienced the same exact things that a targeted individual will experience, being poked, prodded, zapped. Um, yeah, I mean, sometimes it feels like you're being stabbed with certain instruments, or I mean, it's very, very, very bizarre. You'll get like precision itch spots, like on your groin or on your chest or on your face, on your hands, a lot of times. Um, but everything that he described, and this is way before I mean, way before technology even existed. He was describing
When
the
was
same.
this?
This was before Tesla. I want to say this was the late 1700s
So
was when
yeah,
this was documented.
it wouldn't have anything to do with technology then, right? Yeah.
Oh no, no, absolutely not. But
Yeah.
yet he found the technological explanation. He actually created his own thing he called an heirloom that he believed was being used against him because that's how external it was to him. Um,
What do you mean by an heirloom?
it's just his thing that he created, that he drew up, so he had an image in his head of the machinery that was being used by the parliament to broadcast thoughts into his head. And the way
Even
he
though
drew it up,
even though that wasn't around yet.
it didn't even exist. He totally was just said, this is what it absolutely has to be, some sort of mechanism that people are using against him, because of the way that it was occurring. Everything that was being said to him was being said in present moment time. It was meant for his detriment. He actually wound up being thrown into an insane asylum and then being in the end diagnosed as completely sane. Like there was nothing irrational about him, just this occurrence that was happening to him that he had no real explanation for. Yeah. So I do believe that because if this same thing had happened to me 20 years ago, right? Um, before the invent and exposure of a lot of these technologies that we see out now, I would have just immediately gone the spiritual route. Immediately, I would have just said, "Oh, this is either angels or this is demons or this is whatever," and just went that route 100%. But only because I have access to the internet and access to other people and dialogue with other people, and I can see their explanations for what they're coming up with, was I then exposed to certain things like brain to brain interface, brain to computer interface, V2K, like these, you start getting these sort of terms in your head and you believe, well, this is what it must be. And for me, I don't believe that that's what it is. Again, I'm going to say truthfully, the only truthful thing that I can say is I don't know. But my personal belief, and the faith that I have in that belief is that that is not what it is. Because what this thing does to an individual, if you can push through it, is it makes you into the exact opposite of a person that the government wants you to be. Meaning that all this did was make me stronger. All this did was make me um almost, I don't want to say anarchist, but come to the belief that as a whole, you know, government's not absolutely necessary. Like we don't absolutely, if people, everybody just kind of got their shit together and everybody became comfortable within themselves and stopped trying to have this like big ego battle with everybody else, we really wouldn't need such oversight. It does. It makes you very independent. Um, and it makes you question a lot of things too, So there was never been at any time any real agenda. Like I was never steered like, let's push him towards Republican or let's push him towards Democrat or let's push him towards Christian or none of these things ever happened. Like I was never pushed into one sort of ideology or philosophy at any time. The only thing it did was made me question the philosophies and ideologies that I held to be true at a very deep level, so that to have a very deep understanding and sense of security in the things that I believe and why I believe them and why my worldviews are the way that they are, to remain unwavering in who I am and why I am the way that I am and why I perceive things the way that I do.
Yeah, and well, first of all, I think that it's great that you're coming out about it and talking about it, and it looks like you've done a lot of podcasts. I think you have your own podcast, right?
I just started doing, I thought it was important to document the similarities between myself and other people that go through this because it can very easily be misconstrued as schizophrenia or psychosis. So I began doing interviews with, or I call them discourses because it's more, it's not really me interviewing somebody, it's just a back and forth um with other people, from everywhere, and I post them on YouTube so that other people can sit there and they can relate, and then the feedback that I get, like, oh my God, they said the same exact thing to me. I mean, people are hearing the same exact word for word thing all across the globe, experiencing the same exact signs and symptoms all across the globe. It's like if you want to call it psychosis, then it's, I've never known psychosis to be contagious. That's all I'm going to say. It's just, it doesn't happen. When you have certain things that are happening, like very specific statements that are being said to an individual, and it's not just that individual, it's happening all across the world in different languages to different people, you really have to wonder what the heck this is that people are now being tapped into or they're being allowed to tap into.
Yeah. So, and then it sounds like you still are having the experiences now, right? I think you said like, when was the last one you had, like 3 months ago or something, or even more recent?
Yeah, so I used to get very strong evoked states of anxiety and and panic and fear, and they go far beyond anything that a it could be described as an anxiety attack or a panic attack. This was almost like almost as if like they started with very abusive dialogue on a very low level, and then I could hear myself fighting it and fighting it and fighting and fighting and fighting and fight, and then it would just explode, and then it would come out, and then there would be almost like a vision. If I shut my eyes, I could actually see like a vision to want to punch something or kick something or hit. I used to hit myself in the head, like get out, whatever it is. It was so invasive. Um, and that doesn't happen anymore. I don't get the poking or the prodding or anything like that. Even the voices. Once I really came into a place of self-centeredness with all of this, um, the voices, they started receding. So what was once 24/7, I'm talking from the time I woke up to the going to sleep, all through the night while I'm sleeping, I'm hearing the voices in my dreams, just constantly tapped into this thing. I would say now is like it'll be bad first thing in the morning as I'm coming up, into that awake state of mind, as I'm coming out of my unconscious, sleep. for maybe the first half an hour, and then it's relatively quiet throughout the rest of my day. There might be some brief periods here and there where a voice might chime in and just say something nonsensical or, whatever. And then, so I say probably 80% of my day is in silence these days, and, life has gone back to normal. But that was only able to occur once I got my life back on track, because here's the truth, right? 15 months ago, 16 months ago, I was sleeping in a tent under a bridge in St. Louis, Missouri. And now 16 months having gone through this, and this is the miraculous part that I try to impress upon everybody, because I really have no evidence um to prove any of this. The only real evidence I have is my consistent outward expression of the inward change that occurred for me. That was not of my own doing. Um, to today, fully employed in, health benefits. My daughter has a sober, present father who will never have to see him drink or do that kind of stuff. Um, my girlfriend and I are together. We're both doing fantastic. All of my relationships with my family have been restored. Yeah, and then I started doing this, the thing on Reddit, on Positive TI on Reddit with, helping other people try to see like a clearer picture of this and help them overcome their fears and not get stuck in the torture of it all. Um, so, and that was only through, I spent 22 days in rehab, and that was it. No AA meetings, no NA meetings, no sponsor, I mean, nothing like that. It was just, but it was almost like a metaphysical 12-step program that they ran on me, which is absolutely crazy.
Yeah, so I want to ask about that, but I mean, in terms of the actual visions or whatever, I
Yeah.
feel like you said before, like 3 months ago, or even more recently, you've seen kind of like orbs, tennis ball type
Yes.
orbs. So that kind of
Yeah.
stuff is still happening, but it's not
Yes.
as extreme as it was. Like you'll still see these kind of visions, but it's not like voices just constantly talking to you. It's like only like 20% of the
Now
day.
the orbs,
But
now the orbs, those aren't visions. The orbs are in my physical reality. Like that's not a part. Like if I shut my eyes, I'm not going to see them. They're a part of my environment. These orbs that have been coming around lately.
well,
And
that would still be a vision though, right? Because they're not really there. You're just
well,
seeing
it's
them.
technically it's technically a UAP. It's no, they are there.
How do you
That's what I'm
know they're
saying,
there?
because I can see them. What do you mean? Like
Well,
it's the same way I know an airplane is there. I can see it.
but does anybody else see it?
What do you think? No. Yeah, I mean, so far all the encounters have been alone at nighttime when I'm on my back deck. But I'm not alone in this experience, if that's what you're asking me. Like, am I the only person that has gone through a targeted individual experience and then documented or told, like, let other people know that they're being visited by light orbs? Like, no, I'm far from alone with that.
So you actually feel like you are really are being visited by light orbs?
I know that I am.
How do
Yeah,
you
that's
know it?
because I can see them. I don't understand where the confusion is with this.
Well, if if you've seen things before, if you've heard things before, how do you know it's just not like you're just like kind of like seeing it? You know what I mean?
No, there's a big difference. I mean, there's a big difference between knowing when something is just a part of your, I guess, like third eye vision, right? Or is, because a lot of times when people are even meditating, they're having visions, they're seeing things, they're going, they're in certain places. Um, okay, so here's a good example. All right. So let's say you took a hit of acid, right? And you have the acid and you're seeing all these visuals, right? You know that it's not actually a part of your reality, right? That it's all your mind intermingling with your reality, right? It's distorting your perception of reality. Well, when something like this happens, um, I've had the moments where it's been a part of my mind, but if I shut my eyes, I can still see it because it's not actually a part of my environment. So if I shut my eyes, I can still see it. If I open up my eyes, it overlays that reality. With these orbs, if I shut my eyes, I don't see them. Like they are a part of my reality. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Do you feel like if somebody else was there with you, they'd be able to like? Do you really just think it's like
Oh no, I know 100% if somebody else was standing there, they'd see it.
So
Yeah,
you really feel
absolutely.
like, so you really feel like you're being kind of like visited by UAPs then?
I know I am. Yeah. It's not a feeling, you know. It's like I know that I am. Yeah.
But I mean, when do you think that anybody else would see these UAPs too? Like, just
I
I
mean,
know
it's a
people are.
common occurrence.
I yeah.
It's a common occurrence that people see UAPs, especially these light orbs, right? So even if you go on like experiencers on Reddit, I would say out of all the UAPs that are seen, orbs are the most common, right? They have the most documented, proof of like a light orb that's coming by. And I don't know what the heck, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's extraterrestrial. I don't know if it's interdimensional. I don't know if it's spiritual. Like, um, when I say spiritual, I mean like dead people. I don't know. I absolutely have no clue what it is. But I know that
Could it
it's not.
potential?
What's
Sorry.
that?
Could it potentially be just like, like a lot of times people will they say they see a UAP, but really it might just be like a plane flying by, or you know what I mean? Like, I
Oh
mean, could
yeah.
it
I mean,
potentially just be like a it's not really necessarily like an alien spaceship. It's just kind of like something they see like off in the distance, and you can't really explain what it is. Or is it like
no,
so
this isn't.
close to you that you
Oh yeah,
can?
these are about 40 feet away. Yeah, these are 40 feet away.
Are they trying to like
Yeah.
talk to you at all, or say
No,
anything,
they
or
just do like a
no?
no, they just do like a flyby.
How many are there?
The most has ever been at one time is two. Usually there's just one that'll kind of come and do like almost like like sperm, like a squiggle line across overhead. Um, and one time there was two, one went this way, and then the other one came back, the opposite trajectory. And yeah, I mean they're too close. They're too bright. It's just light. I mean, that's the only way that I can describe it. Is just a ball of light that leaves a streak behind it. That just zips overhead. It comes in out of nothing and then disappears into nothing. So I don't know if that light comes on so that it can show itself and then it turns its light off, or if it is coming from a different dimension into ours and then back into its dimension. I mean, that's the only two things it really could be doing.
Okay, I'm just like wondering like why like I don't see these things and you do. You know
Do
what
you
I mean?
ever?
Like, do you what?
Yeah.
Do
Do
you
you
feel
ever?
do you feel like they're coming to kind of like interact with you specifically, or do you?
Oh, let me ask you a question. And actually, I'm actually really glad. I'm actually no, I don't think that I am anybody special. I'll say that first off. I don't think that I am unique. I think as a human, I'm every human is unique, but I'm not anything special by any means whatsoever. I'm a 44-year-old forklift driver. That's that's my credentials. So, and this is the part I really want a lot of people to understand is that if this can happen for me, there is no reason whatsoever that this can't happen for other people. And I would say the appropriate steps if you wanted to bring something like this into your life is to first of all get rid of any expectations that you may have on what it is. There's no room for arrogance or ego with dealing with this stuff because the second the person that knows everything they can learn absolutely nothing, right? Even Socrates said, I know that I am intelligent because I know that I know nothing. Go into this thing with an open mind. Okay, go into it skeptic but willing to learn. Okay, and and optimistic as well. um Clear, if you can, like a lot of people will do a lot of meditation work, before they try to initiate some sort of contact. All right, clear yourself out of all any sort of like ego or arrogance. Really get yourself into a state of humility with this thing. But before all of that, it is important that even a conversation like what you and I are having right now is in your head, right? Like that seed is planted in your head. Because if that seed isn't planted in your head, well, then you're not even going to be looking for something like that, right? You're not even going to bring something like that into your life because you're just going to be completely ignorant to it, going about your 9 to 5 job and paying your bills and watching Netflix and going to bed at an appropriate time and hanging out at the bar on weekends. Like you're just going to be so stuck in your American routine that you're not going to take any time to really start questioning phenomena and what phenomena is and how it can relate to you and how do you relate back to it. So that's those two things, right? Get it in your head first of all that this may be even just set the intention. Set the intention within yourself that this is something that I would really like to experience. And then humble yourself to whatever that experience, however it may manifest itself. Like don't come at it angry, don't come at it mad, don't come at it swinging with a baseball. Just whatever happens, just kind of experience it as is, as an observer. That's all.
Yeah,
I mean those two things are huge.
yeah. So I just kind of wanted to go over some questions and then we could move on. So
Okay.
for one, the drugs, you mentioned the meth and like the coke and all that. So first of all, I'm kind of curious, why did you get on them in the first place? Like,
Wait, say it again. Why what?
why did you get on? Why did you start doing drugs in the first place? Like, was it just for fun, or was it like for some sort of like kind of like some sort of like psychological reason, maybe?
I would say that drugs and alcohol for me were a crutch. Yeah, it really was. I guess I had a very difficult time managing my emotions well, or dealing with emotions um well. I would say that, if you can look at people as far as like heredity deals the cards and environment plays the hand. Um, my father was an alcoholic. He actually died last year, stomach cancer due to drinking. My grandfather was an alcoholic. My uncle was an alcoholic. My brother, who committed suicide in 2009, alcoholic. I come from a long line of Irish alcoholics. Um, and I don't want to say that I was born into alcoholism, but I certainly had some sort of a, predetermining factor within me that the second that I began to consume alcohol, it was like, oh, where's this been my entire life? Like I really thought that I had found like, the key to life, like this is the fountain of youth here. Like I can really be who I am and express myself. But the whole time that you're falling down the tube of drugs and alcohol, you're losing yourself. Like you're really not learning how to manage your life appropriately and your emotions appropriately. And then what eventually happens is as you continue down that path, and this is a part that a lot of people don't talk about, you're creating false memories, right? So especially when you start dealing with drugs like cocaine or methamphetamine that release huge amounts of serotonin and dopamine, painting your bedroom is not meant to have the same emotional discharge as a Rage Against the Machine concert. Like you're placing false emotions on these memories that you're having in your life, and you would spread that out there over the course of decades. Well, now you have an entire past that's a complete lie. And then once you quit, you really have to go back and reassess everything. Like, you know, start placing the appropriate perspective on all of life's moments. Otherwise, you're still stuck in the extreme of it all, right? Because for as good as a lot of the up extremes were, the down extremes were absolutely terrible. For every action, there's an opposite and equal reaction. For that up, there's always going to be that crash, right? And even the crash part of it, now I have the wrong emotion placed on, let's say I was crashing during somebody's birthday or somebody's, now I'm in that an uplifting environment in a very terrible mood, right? So I have to go back and look at that. Why was I in a bad mood? Because it was drugs, it was all synthetic. So you really have to learn to let a lot of that stuff go, because otherwise you get tethered and you start clinging to the past and you get stuck in the regret and the embarrassment and the emotion, and your the guilt of it all, your guilt and shame of your entire past will leave you tethered to it. So, and all this stuff has to kind of get, sort it through once you get sober and, do it with a clear head. But yeah, I would definitely say that for me was one of the biggest things with drugs and alcohol. It became an emotional crutch for me. It was like my cane in life.
Yeah, I mean, I could be wrong, but I kind of feel like most people start doing drugs for a reason. Like you said, like it's an emotional crutch, or like maybe you're depressed or you're anxious or whatever, and so you start doing drugs.
Yeah,
Like I do Xanax actually, just because it's like I have a lot of anxiety, and it helps the anxiety. Do I want to be on it? Not really. Like, you know what I mean? I prefer, just like you would prefer to be off of those drugs. Like, it's almost like something that like helps me get through the day, as opposed to,
yeah,
oh, I'm just doing this for fun. But like with
Yeah.
something like meth or something, I've kind of just wondered like why meth? Because it's like
Well, a lot of people,
from looking at meth, it kind of seems like it's like this seems like it could really make me just go like off the walls and stay up all, you
yeah.
know what I mean? So it's like how would the meth be kind of like a good emotional crutch, you know?
So meth is very subtle, first of all. It has a very long half-life. So you figure, cocaine, like if you do a line of cocaine, you get high, but then that high doesn't really last that long, and you kind of crash before you're immediately wanting to do another line of cocaine. Now with meth, the way that that works, the high is, like the total high is about 14 hours long. So it has a half-life of 7, 8 hours, right? Which is absolutely insane. And I'm talking a very small amount of methamphetamine does this, but it's not like that overly like jittery kind of a high. It's a very more of a subtle alertness. So especially when I first started doing it, um, again, like I did it and I was like, man, this is like it's like jet fuel for your brain. You're multitasking better than you ever have. You're thinking more clearly. You're thinking at a higher level. Sleep becomes optional. Like, you're a monster. And I just worked and worked and worked. I started a business, when I first started doing this. But relationally, you become very, very distant. Your mind focuses on tasks and not on maintaining relationships or maintaining a relationship with yourself. You just become very very much involved in these whatever sort of work it is that you're doing. And a lot of people, if you don't have work, well, now they're super hyper focused on just cleaning their house. They'll just turn into clean freaks and just start, because your brain is going so fast, you have to do something with it. And it feels good to do these things that you can be super invested in and super hyper focused on. But eventually, what happens is your brain starts getting mushy. And what you were able to multitask, you're not able to multitask anymore, and now you're having your thoughts are scattered. They're very just they're not categorized whatsoever. They're all over the place. You begin to forget things. I used to have a good routine, and then I started forgetting my routine because I'm thinking about 20 completely trivial arbitrary things that have absolutely no importance on my day-to-day life, but because of the methamphetamine, it's like this is so important. I have to do this thing, like to feel a sense of fulfillment. And eventually, what happens is that you wind up going through all these tasks, and you're only finding a sense of fulfillment in doing the same repetitive, stupid action over and over and over again. And then in that 1 minute, you get stuck just doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. And it's sneaky, because when you try to come off of it, well, now you'll crash. You're tired, you're eating a lot, you're sleeping, you're eating, you're sleeping, you're eating, and then you'll wake up and you actually will trick yourself that you can't be as fully functioning of a human being without this drug. Like that's how much of a mental grip that it'll have on the brain, that you can't be as fully functioning, higher operating, higher frequency level being unless you are on this drug, when it's actually the complete opposite.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is, the reason why I asked, like, why do it, why get into it, and so I understand, like, you kind of explained why, because you become this like superhuman, and like you're just able to like do so many things. But for me, I guess just for me, it's kind of like if I take a drug, I want it to like mellow me out. Like, I don't want it to like make
Yeah.
me crazier. You know what I mean? Like make me more hyper and like more aware. I want it to like mellow me out because I already am so hyper aware and I have so much anxiety and stuff. Yeah. So in terms of yeah, for you, but you said like you had trouble like um controlling your emotions or whatever. Like did it help with that, like controlling the emotions or
Oh no, I mean no, not at all. In fact, what it does is
well, that's what I'm saying. It almost
it
seems like
makes
for
you
someone
emotionless. You know what it is with the stimulants, because I was a heavy drinker as well, which is a depressant. So for me it was that mixture of the two. I really got acclimated to and enjoyed, and at that time, drinking to a point where I had like a good buzz going or even like a slight drunkenness, and then doing the stimulant to snap me out of it, and then drinking and bringing, that constant up and down, up and down, with my brain chemicals like that. So, yeah, I mean I think that was a big part of it, like what I had gotten addicted to was that snap out of the drunkenness.
Yeah. So do you feel like that could have played? You said before that like a lot of people who have done meth tend to experience this type of thing. So do you think that that could have played into some of like? Do you feel like if you hadn't done the drugs, you would have the same experiences?
I don't know. Yeah, I really don't know. I mean, the timing of when it came into my life 24/7 coincided with when I really, I found out that my girlfriend was pregnant and I really wanted to get it right and get sober. So, um, and then as time goes on and you realize that this sort of thing is, is a possibility, that our minds are not alone and that there's a lot of manipulation that goes on behind the scenes, right? Well, then you begin to question your free will, so like, and not to like scapegoat any of this, or pass the buck, but it's like, I have to stand accountable for my own actions in the past. But then once you become aware of certain things and you realize how easily manipulated and susceptible to manipulation that the mind is, you start to really question yourself, how much of my previous nefariousness was of my own doing and not some unheard manipulation that I didn't know was going on at the time. Um, which if you think about that, which if you think about that, um, is not really an uncommon, concept. If because if you take any major world religion, right, and we'll just use Christianity for example, there's always the documentation of angels and demons. There's always some sort of interdimensional entity behind the scenes of man manipulating their minds, you know? Now if you're Muslim, they have jinn. Um, if you're in Japan, they have kami. So every major world religion has some sort of interdimensional entity operating behind the scenes, manipulating man, right? So, I mean, if you can really think about that, well, then it's like, oh yeah, I mean, this isn't a very uncommon thing. So, I don't know if that drug, methamphetamine, if that opens you up to the negative aspects of that manipulation, or it's the lack of sleep or just the constant stress on the brain or whatever these things are, but if you can look at it through a religious lens or a spiritual lens, you start to realize like, yeah, this isn't that uncommon of a concept. We're just now, technology is kind of coming into play with this thing. So it's sounding a little bit different than how it usually is.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And in terms of going forward with, so you got off the drugs, then you went to a rehab. Like,
Yeah.
what did they say it was? And then did they also put you on other drugs that I would imagine that you'd want to be on something that mellowed you out, right? Because it's like if I, or at least I would, like if I was hearing voices or whatever, like paranormal phenomenon was happening to me, it seemed like I know with like schizophrenics, I'm not saying you're schizophrenic, but I know with like schizophrenics, they'll like put them on some sort of like downer to like just mellow them out. So what did they say it was? How did they try and help you? And then like did they give you
No,
any type
dude,
of
I did this
drugs?
entire, I've no. So since I got sober, I've been 100% sober. I've gone through this entire ordeal 100% unmedicated and have actually gone to sit down with a psychiatrist and left there undiagnosed. So there's no, which, again, makes this a very difficult thing sometimes for people to understand. But when I sit there and in my right state of mind, very, lucidly and candidly explain to somebody my experience and what's happening, and there's no distortion in my reality whatsoever. Like I'm a very, very fully functioning individual that pays his bills every month, like just like everybody else, and goes on vacation. And I just had something very strange, and bizarre happen to me. Um, no, I didn't want to start taking drugs, because I knew that what was happening for me, even as torturous as the moments were, was for my benefit. I knew that, and I've known that this entire time, that what was happening to me, like it was a helping hand, but it came in the form of a fist.
Why? Like, why do you feel like it was helping you?
Like again, because of the timing of it all and everything that it forced me to do. It ran exactly like exposure therapy. It was like a cognitive behavioral therapy that came from a metaphysical level. That's, it was very sequential, procedural, well synchronized event that took place that forced me to face every aspect about myself that I liked and didn't like and to question everything. Like that's just, it was like a program that ran.
I mean, do you feel like it could have been in a weird way, like your body's way of just kind of like setting you straight or whatever, like your body's way of like fixing yourself then?
Had it not been, right? So had it not been for the visuals, the dream manipulation, the fact that the same exact thing occurs all over the world in the same exact sequence with the same exact statements. Um, the orbs, like a lot of the things that have happened to me go so far outside of the boundaries of psychosemantics. I am left with very little choice but to know that this is not a part of my psyche, that my psyche is connected elsewhere, or something is connected to my psyche, or all of us connected to something, but just to know that I'm part of a collective, and that that collective took the time to punch through to do some work so that I could be a better person. So it was made very clear to me that a lot of the statements that they say are just roundabout lies lies that are stated to make you forced to kind of grow a better sense of discernment, or to view something aspect about yourself that you're not willing to look at. But every now and then something comes through that actually makes a lot of sense. And one of the things that they said was that arrested development had occurred, meaning that at this age in my life, I had fallen way behind, you know. So whatever your spiritual or philosophical or religious belief is on life, you can analyze that statement any way that you want. Um, yeah, I don't know. I just took it as, like I said, like somebody was giving me a helping hand, and it came in a very unorthodox, invasive, aggressive manner. But it worked. It absolutely worked.
And then like if you had to say who do you think that was doing that in your own opinion? What do you think it was that was trying to push you that way?
Mm, I don't believe that it's a human source. I'll say that. Um, I, I tend to, and again, I use the word believe, you know, very, very heavily because I don't know, but I go more the spiritual route with this thing, and I prefer the term like interdimensional NHI, you know, interdimensional non-human intelligence, which could be, however you want to look at it. I don't want to say angels and demons because these entities will play both roles. Like they have no problem playing both sides of the fence of good and evil as if the fence itself doesn't even exist. They're completely amoral, but they're entirely dedicated to balance. If that makes any sense. So it's like, in order to preserve the balance, you kind of have to be able to play both sides of the fence. You have this, because like biblically, you have this constant battle between like good and evil. And what I'm saying is that it's all one and the same, and um if you look at like Buddhist belief and how they interpret this, it makes a lot of sense. So um they'll say that if Mara, which is like the Buddhist version of Satan, or the concept of Satan, if Mara is the full embodiment of evil, and Buddha is the full embodiment of goodness and purity, both of them are the same concept. And that is the concept of manifestation, meaning that both polarities of good and evil are entirely needed for the full range, everything in between, the ultimate good act and the ultimate bad act, and everything in between is strictly there for the purpose of our human manifestation, so that we can experience and have, go through this life in relation to education and enlightenment. You know, that's kind of how I perceive all this. So whoever those entities are behind the scenes that kind of manipulate and orchestrate these theatrics, that happen in the, or orienting a person's life into a certain direction, call them whatever you want. They have a lot of different labels and a lot of different titles depending on what um, theological or dogmatic view you have. Um, but interdimensional NHI, I think, is a pretty good broad term, to label them.
Yeah, I had a guy on this podcast who was saying that like all good comes from bad and then all bad. It's kind of like what you were just saying, where it's like not
Yeah,
necessarily good or bad, but it's like I guess somebody who like Hitler or something. Obviously, he's bad. You want to say he's bad, but it's like
right.
or like the worst person. It's like I think it. I don't want to say it comes from a good place, but it's like I think in their mind. I mean, I don't even know how I could really say that, but basically, it's kind of like evil and good are kind of yeah, like somehow we're at.
Well,
But it's like the last thing
well,
I want to do is say some, it's like Hitler wasn't evil, but it's kind of like comes from the same place, which is ultimately not necessarily good or bad, but I guess just like you were saying, like
it's
human,
all part of the same concept. So if you can look at it like this, right? Um, you you can't have one without the other.
yeah,
You can't have evil without good. You can't
it's like
have good.
the yin and the yang, right?
It's exactly what it is. Yeah,
Yeah,
everything is completely entirely reliant upon one another for the purpose of existence, so without evil we wouldn't know what good is. So if you can look at every negative aspect of this experience that I occurred, every last little bit of it was a catalyst or a push or a motivator to push me towards doing better, you know which
yeah,
I question, which I question that a lot, because it's like, man, did I, on my own accord, was I just that shitty of a human being that I just I couldn't just do right, by my own means, by my own sense of free will? Or has there always been some sort of a interdimensional manipulation going on behind the scenes that's just creating a good narrative? A lot of people believe that too. Um, yeah, yeah, it's so easy to get trapped in that sort of thinking, because it's like, and you may never have the answer to it, so it's like a lot of times I really have to be content with not knowing, especially when something is this attached to you. It's like your brain is like, it's freaking out because your brain's job is to make sense of things, right? Like that's what you're doing right now. You're trying to make sense of things. That's a totally healthy, normal functioning brain. Our brain's job is to make order, right? It puts things in order. So when something like this happens, and it doesn't make any sense, and everything's out of order, and it's just so consistent and persistent, it's very easy to go mad throughout the process, you know. But
yeah,
contentment lies in saying I don't know. Like you really have to just be content with yourself and say I don't know, nor do I expect myself to know, but I'm willing to learn as time goes on, and just try to find yourself in that. Yeah.
yeah. So in terms of what the psychiatrist, you said, so you actually went to like a rehab, right? You were in a rehab for 22 days.
Yes.
So I would imagine that they had a lot of people talk to you and try
Oh
and
yeah, yeah.
diagnose you. What did they ultimately say was the what was going on? Like, did they have a? You said you were undiagnosed, but like they must have had some sort of idea of what was going on, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's just like a general broad term of psychosis. I don't think that modern psychiatry. Here's the problem with modern day psychiatry. If you go in to see a psychiatrist and you say, I'm hearing voices, right? The first thing they're going to do is try to put you on medication. And you're going to go through a series of medications. trying to silence the voices, right? And what I'm saying is listen to them. I'm saying listen to them, because they're there for a reason. And usually what they do is they harp on anything that has to do with your pretentious self-image or your negative self-image. This person that you think you are, this person that you want to present to the rest of the world, or this person that you want others to think of you. That's what the voices are going to constantly harp on. So if you can really pay attention to them, and you'll notice that, like, once you become better as a person and you learn how to like rebuttal them appropriately with personal mantras, they start to go away, right? So a lot of people just take medication with no therapy. Well, you're not doing yourself any favors, because now you're in a lot of people go into a very vegetative state because of the medication. And then they get off the medication and the voices come right back because they never dealt with what was going on inside them to begin with. Um, so yeah, there was no diagnosis given whatsoever. It was like, he's hearing voices, but he's functioning perfectly fine. So yeah, so I didn't take medication. I just dealt with it and I'm very, very thankful that I did. It was the most beneficial thing I could have ever done for myself, was face the turmoil in my unconscious that I had been creating throughout my life and face it head on and overcome it.
Yeah, and it sounds like you did, and it sounds like you have to be extremely kind of like strong to be able to do that. Because I would imagine that yeah, like you said, the majority of the people would probably just go take the medicate. I mean, just take anything that works. Which, to me, honestly, to a certain extent, is like what I'm doing. And like it's kind of like when I'm having those anxiety attacks or whatever you want to call them. Like you just want to take anything or do anything to get rid of them.
Yeah.
So so yeah, like what are some ways that you would tell other people to handle it? Like you said, you kind of just have to have like mantra. It almost sounds like you're kind of in a way like not talking yourself out of it, but like um by talking to them or having mantras, you're able to kind of like get rid of the voices, right?
Right. Well, what you're doing is so you what you're doing with a mantra is you're creating a state of mind that is able to withstand, that is able to defend itself. So in the beginning of this, my mantras were, I exist to overcome, I exist to forgive. Um, I exist to be the daughter, to be the father that my daughter needs me to be. I exist to care for others. I intend to inspire. Like very positive, right? Because it was such a negative occurrence, I sought to overcome it with positivity, right? But for as long as you do that, you're still kind of caught. Like, it didn't really quiet the voices. It made some of the nasty statements that they were saying go away. Um, but then they just started saying stupid stuff all the time, So eventually, I came to the realization that because I was fighting the negative with overwhelming positivity, I was still caught in the role of victim and perpetrator, right? I was caught in a cat and mouse game where I could be the cat 1 minute or the mouse the next, oftentimes losing track of which role that I was playing. But for as long as I was either the cat or the mouse, I was either the victim, like I'm being tortured, this is harassment, this is terrible, or I was the perpetrator. I'm going to find you and I'm going to, that type of mentality. I'm going to beat this. That has to go away, because contentment doesn't lie within either of those things. Contentment lies right in the neutral middle, where you're just coming into a place of self-awareness and self-assuredness and self-reliance, where you're completely okay with who you are in this present moment in time, right? Because my thoughts were always in one of two places, right? They were either in the past, and I was reliving the guilt and the depression and the trauma of my past actions, which is where um, all of our worry. I'm sorry, that's like where like a lot of our regret and shame and remorse and embarrassment comes from, or I was worrying about the future, right? What am I going to do when this happens? Like, how am I going to handle this? I should be better when this happens. Like, I'm going to be better. I'm just going to move somewhere else and be somebody better. And when you're constantly thinking like that on the future, what you're doing is now you're living in anxiety. You're living in worry. very rarely are we here right now in the present moment, right? But we only exist in the present moment. So the question is, why are we rarely ever here? You know? So it takes a lot of mindfulness, like being very mindful of your thoughts, because one of my biggest problems that I had was I would have a thought, I would be unaware that I had the thought, and then that thought would lead to a lust. And then that lust left unattended would turn into a behavior or an action. And then that action usually led to suffering, right? That was my cycle all the time. And it wasn't until I started practicing, the mindfulness that this event gave me that I then began to be mindful of a thought. So let's say I had the thought, I'm bored, right? Normally, I wouldn't even recognize that I had the thought, I'm bored, and I'm already out the door pursuing it, usually through synthetic means. And now it's like I had the thought, I'm bored. Well, you know what? It's okay to be bored. Sometimes people are bored. Why are you bored? What can we do that's more constructive than just sitting here being bored? Like and that right there, catching it at the thought. If you can catch things at the thought, then it never has to turn into an action. And then you have more control over yourself in the present moment. I envision a a bundle of TNT with like the long detonating cord, and then somebody going down there with a match. And that match is that initial negative thought. And if you don't blow that thing out, well, then you've already started a chain of reaction that eventually is going to detonate into something that you don't, you may not be too happy about, or just something that you did again. You overate, you looked at pornography, you're trying not to watch porn. Everybody has addictions. I don't care who you are. Everybody's addicted to something. I don't care if it's money, gambling, food, porn, women, work. I don't care. Everybody has something that they're struggling with. But it all starts with a thought, right? And you have to get it right there at that thought and blow that match out before it hits that detonating cord. So
Yeah, well, yeah, one thing that I do, and it sounds similar maybe to what you're doing, but like with the anxiety, it's kind of like just like letting go and like if I have a fear of something happening, being like, oh well, it doesn't really matter. Like, you know what I mean? It's kind of like if I like misspeak on the podcast, or if I do something stupid, or if I trip, or if I just do something
yeah,
crazy, it's like it doesn't matter. Like if I make a mistake or whatever, how big it could be or how small it could be, it is what it is. I mean, that's for me. I don't know if that's the same for you, but it's like I kind of like just it is what it is and just kind of accepting it. And I kind of feel like back to the you kind of mentioned like free will and all that. It's kind of like, a lot of people think that like we don't even have free will. So it's like if we don't even have free will, then it's kind of like just accepting your circumstance and accept being, being in a good just yeah, accepting your situation, I guess, and not kind of like
right,
trying to like fight it.
right.
Um yeah, so as far another thing too is I think that like the big thing with this type of thing is I really do think, and it sounds like what you're doing is trying to figure out what it is. And I kind of feel like if we have the wrong idea of what it is, with whatever it is, with your situation or mine, anxiety, depression, anxiety, or whatever. And I'd say a lot of people, I was raised like Christian, so a lot of people would tell me, oh, you just need to go to church, you need to, and like back in like the 1700s, like you were saying with that guy, or even before, if somebody was schizophrenic or hearing voices or whatever, like they'd kind of like lock him up and put him away, or they thought that he was like maybe possessed by the devil
Yeah,
or whatever. But I think that it's important to kind of like not. It's very very important to kind of like not go down the wrong roads. And it sounds like by with someone like you've thought about it enough and like you've like researched it enough to where, and it sounds like you are doing that, trying to help other people and also kind of coming to like a realization as to why this is actually happening. Because like I said, if you come up with the wrong idea, it could just make it worse. You know what I mean? If you're like,
absolutely.
and I kind of think to a certain extent, like conspiracy theories can do that. And I'm not necessarily saying that like all conspiracy theories are wrong, but when you start thinking like, oh, like the CIA's watching me, or like
Right.
they're tapping into me, they're tapping into my brain,
Yeah.
it can just make you more paranoid, you
Oh,
know?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. There's really nothing more, um, paranoia centric. Like, it's nothing that's going to induce more paranoia than thinking that some government agency is manipulating your thoughts. I mean, that's a very heightened state of paranoia that's, unescapable, because then you start to lose your own sense of self. You'll start thinking that you're going to like some sort of Manchurian candidate. But what you said about not getting caught up in the conspiracy thing too much, you're absolutely right, because what I've learned is that whatever avenue that you go down, well, now, especially if you're dedicated to that belief, that avenue of belief, well, now you're kind of dedicated to that. Now you've become outspoken about that. And now you've put yourself out there thinking that it's this one thing. And then a lot of people are so arrogant that even if proven otherwise, or if something good were to come out of it, right? And you do realize, like, oh, I was just being taught a really harsh lesson by something. Well, now it's like you don't even want to admit that because of your own inability in the beginning to just say, I'm not entirely sure what this is. I'm gonna keep an open mind about this whole thing and talk to other people that have already been in my shoes and that have gone through this, because that was a big thing for me. I immediately reached out to people that have already gone through this, and every single one of them said the same exact thing. What you are experiencing is an angel in demon's disguise. What you're experiencing is a lamb in wolf's clothing. Every single one of them said the same exact thing. So that kept me very, very optimistic, because the majority of people, I'd say 90% of people have gone down the government surveillance, neighbors, local crime watch, police organ, like, and again, a lot of that is because they fail to recognize that it's their mind that's not alone. They think it's somebody's watching them from the outside. And that's totally understandable and excusable. Like I said in the beginning, our mind is this place of solitude. We expect it, and we have lived a life thus far where it's been alone. It's never been occupied by somebody else, right? But when it becomes aware of occupancy, when it becomes aware of that observation, the mind's job is to find order. So it seeks an explanation outside of itself. And this creates a condition that's known as apophenia, where a person will begin to put pieces of a puzzle together that don't exist. And it's not until somebody comes into a place of 100% knowing that what is happening is entirely within their mind, and that there is nothing within their immediate environment that is causing this, that they can that they can relax and leave the neighbors alone and leave the family and friends alone and really get down to some mental work.
Yeah, when you said people told you that it was like an angel in demon's clothing,
Yeah.
like do they like literally mean it's an actual?
Meaning, like, metaphorically, like, this thing is going to seem like it's a very terrible demonic thing, but the end result is going to be for your benefit.
Oh, okay, but it's like not
Yeah.
an actual
No,
spiritual
no, no, no.
angel or demon. Yeah,
No,
yeah,
metaphorically speaking, yeah.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, I feel like if you go down that road of the whole s- spiritual Christian type thing, like a lot of people think like, well, and some people will even say like it's like literally Satan attacking you, and it's like to have Satan attacking you is like almost like the worst possible thing. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's
Yeah.
like, yeah, it's definitely better to have. I think it's better to look at it the way that you do.
Well,
Um,
you know what it's like. So, the story in the Bible where Jesus goes out into the desert to fast, and while he's out there, he's being tempted by Satan 3 times. But then after he's done being tempted, angels come to comfort him. And this experience, it what it kind of shows you is that there's really no separation between the two. It's as if the same entity that tempted Jesus out in the desert was the same one that comforted him in the end. It was just playing both roles for the strength of him, for his own experience and strength and belief in who he was. It's like that.
Yeah. So yeah, you also kind of mentioned that lady, I forgot her name, who I want to check out, but
Dr.
who's
Leslie Ellis. Yeah.
yeah, so she thinks that like we're almost kind of like always in a dream state and like
No, she knows. No. So, and it's not that we're always in a dream state. We're always dreaming, right? So we think that we only dream or create dreams while we're sleeping, and that's not true. Like, it's been proven that we're creating a dream at all times, right? At all times in your head, there is a whole nother recreation of this reality that is occurring within the unconscious of the mind. And that dream is based off of a lot of times this perception of this reality, right? And how we're to handle things in this reality.
Yeah, that's kind of like an interesting take on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not like it's not that we're always in a so like right now we're not necessarily in a dream, but our mind is
But
kind of like
your mind is
create
dreaming though. Yes.
yeah. That's pretty interesting. So it kind of like is like we are always in a dream then, right?
In a way, yeah, there's a whole nother version of you that's living out the manner in which you perceive this reality in your head. And it's my belief that that reality that we recreate in our head, um, you know, I'm not a physicist or anything like that, or so I don't want to say that it's another that it is entirely a whole nother real dimension or it's a part of the multiverse or whatever it is, but it's that just think about everybody dreams, so everybody can relate to how crazy that your dreams can be, and to think that even while you're awake that sort of craziness is still going on in your head. And then what happens with somebody that goes through an experience like what I went through, it's as if you're exposed to that while you're awake. And then the two realities will commingle, they'll come together. Um, and then you begin to hear, think about the people that you speak to in your dreams and the things that you're doing and the activities that you're involved in. And you hear that while you're awake. And it can be maddening. It can be absolutely, absolutely maddening. So here's another interesting thing that I think is important to bring up. The manner in which um, you know, people that are going through my experience hear the voices. So um I would hear the voices intermingled with ambient noise, right? So as a car is going down the street, like that the whirring of the fan in the bathroom, that any sort of ambient noise, that's where you hear the voices from. So which tells me that the part of our brain that is responsible for filtering out ambient noise is the part of the brain that is experiencing this as well. Now I've had it actually as both, where it's been entirely within my head, but then a lot of times you hear it and it's completely outside of you, which adds a whole nother, um, like a whole nother deal to this thing, because this happens to people and they think that it is happening outside of them. They'll hear things like, somebody's calling their name and they hear it outside of them. But really, it's just intertwining with. I've heard the voices intertwined with running water, crickets in the background, cicada, and just think of any kind of ambient noise that's just happening in the background that your brain just automatically filters out as a safe noise. It'll intertwine, with that, which can lead to some scary moments if you don't understand what's happening.
So basically if you hear like crickets or running water or a car tire or whatever, like you'll hear the voices kind of alongside of that or over that or like almost that
Intertwined with it, almost intertwined with it, almost assuming the same tone and pitch as the ambient noise, right? So if you hear something that's going woo woo woo, well, on the down part of that, the silent part of that, you don't hear anything, but then it'll woo, and then it'll almost sound like what are you doing today? It'll sound like that. Yeah, it's very bizarre.
yeah, that's interesting. And it just seems I don't know, it almost seems like they could do a lot more research on this type of stuff from somebody like you who knows how it is. And so you haven't heard any voices in a while, right?
Like I said, first thing in the morning, as I'm waking up through that, coming into that awake state of mind before I'm fully up and alert and getting ready to go to work, it's at its worst. They're still there for like the first half hour in the morning. And then, and then it quiets down. And then throughout the day at work, it's quiet. Um, even when I got home today, there was like a little bit of chatter, and I just, you get to the point where you just don't care. You don't care. And then it's like the more that you don't care about what's being said, the quieter it gets. But for the most part, people, it's very difficult for people to come into a place of not caring what is being said because who doesn't want to hear what other people are saying about them, right? You know, everybody's like, it's almost like you're eavesdropping in on some, some metaphysical conversation about you that you don't know where it's coming from. So your mind is just constantly clinging to this, hoping for some glimpse of an explanation, never receiving one, and that leads to a lot of frustration. But if you can really come into a place where you're like, you know what, like I'm okay, like I don't really give a shit anymore what's said about me, who says what about me, I don't care. It that's the beginning stages of it really starting to quiet it down.
Yeah, plus if you're hearing voices, I could see like the whole like you kind of like don't really want to be like you've heard that if you hear voices, it's like crazy or psychotic or whatever, and it's like so it probably scares you to hear the voices, right?
Yeah, yeah, I mean,
And so
especially depending on what your background is, like anybody who's raised Christian and they start hearing voices, they're going to think demons. A lot of it, if somebody's brought up and they're like a little bit more just spiritual or open-minded, then they're going to think, that it's their higher self or something along those lines. There are so many explanations as to what these voices are, and the only real thing that anybody can say is, you don't know. It's open for analysis. It's almost like an abstract accountability, something that has worth or doesn't have worth depending on your perception of it. Something that has value or no value depending on how you value it. Um, that's the best way to put it.
yeah, and when you hear the voices in the morning or just before, like whenever, like I guess in the morning you say it's a lot. So is it kind of just like a bunch of voices coming at once?
It used to be multiple all the time, and then it backed off to like just one voice at a time. And now it's still, when I do hear it, that's how it is still. It's still just one voice at a time, and it's usually just there's like two. There's like a female and a male, and that's it, And I might hear her periodically throughout, most, like I said, most of the time in the morning, and then maybe periodically throughout the day. Um, and I just go, I'm okay, I'm good. In my head, I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. Just keep it
Yeah.
moving. Yeah.
So I was gonna say if this happens to you while you're at work or if you're in public, like you just kind of say, okay, like you to yourself, you just kind of like basically just
Yeah,
learn
I just
learn to
ignore it.
ignore it.
Like
Yeah.
I said, my mantras have changed a lot, over the past year. And what was, used to be, like I said, very positive. Eventually I came into very neutral statements that were like, because one of the things that they used to say to me all the time is we're punching you in the face right now. So, which I remember I told you, like I used to have dreams where I'd be punching somebody in the face and it wasn't having any effect on them whatsoever. Meaning that was like symbolic of me not being able to overcome something in my life. Right. So I'm sure that there's some sort of a weird play there with that. Um, so my main mantra for for a while now has been, I have nothing for you, I require nothing from you, and I have no fight with you. Right. And that right there, it's a release. You're releasing yourself from that perpetrator victim role. You're releasing yourself from the expectation of getting anything from this. Because it's almost like something of such an extraordinary circumstance calls for an extraordinary outcome. And then it's like, you have to just come into a place where it's like, you're not going to get some sort of like healing powers. You're not going to be able to shoot lasers from your eyeballs or anything crazy like that. Just be content that you're a sober father today. Just be content that you're holding down your house. Just be content that you can actually be a good friend to somebody else and help them get through a time of tribulation, through a tumultuous moment in their life. Be content in the little things, because for as long as I continue to seek something from them or require something from them, it just it would be more and more maddening. But the moment that I came into a place of neutrality with the whole thing, and I began to view them as amoral, not good or bad or anything like that. That for me was the ticket right there. That was Yeah.
Yeah, I think the like I think the idea of good and bad. That's why I think that really evil versus really good can be kind of like it can be a bad thing, but I think that like you feel really guilty about something that you've done or may do, or you had a thought and you feel really guilty, or this is for me at least, like if you have like a bad thought and you feel really guilty and then you just start thinking about the thought over and over again, why did I have that thought? I don't
Right.
even know where that thought come from. But if you just look at it as kind of like not being good or bad, it's just kind of like it is what it is. It's kind of like more just like you just don't care about it as much as it being like a positive or a negative.
Right.
Also with like the dreaming thing, when you said like early in the morning you hear stuff more than I've kind of thought about that too. Like, like when you have like a nightmare or maybe you're just kind of like worried in your dream or whatever, then you wake up and you're still worried and then you kind of go throughout your day worried. I feel like there is some sort of connection between the real world and dreams. And like you said, if you don't get enough sleep, then it kind of becomes this like you almost like don't know if you're, asleep or awake. And then if you
Yeah.
get, it's almost like if you get too much sleep, you become too much like in that dream world kind of, and
Right. 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 Right.
yeah.
I used to
So
get
yeah.
the sleep paralysis where, my my mind would be awake, but my body just wasn't there yet. And that's a scary place to be because you're just kind of stuck. Like you know that you're laying on the couch and you're taking a nap and you know that you're supposed to be like that you're awake, but you're in a comatose vegetative state that you can't quite seem to get yourself out of. And that's a very frightening place, to be. I used to have that happen frequently, and I can't honestly, I haven't had that in a long time, but yeah, that's sleep paralysis is some scary stuff.
Yeah, that's never happened to me, but it does sound scary. And like I said, I had some guys recently on to talk about astral projection. So
Yeah.
like they're really into kind of like they say like when they go to sleep, after a certain amount of time they enter REM sleep or whatever, and then at some point like they're literally able just to kind of float off and like they can see
Yeah.
their body and they're in like a different dimension or whatever. And I was almost I don't know if you believe in that kind of stuff or not, but it's like I was almost kind of like just wondering, wouldn't that kind of just be like, is that really happening or are they just dreaming? Have they just kind of found a way to
No.
kind of
Oh my,
like,
yeah. I mean, I personally believe that that is 100% happening. So I believe that consciousness in itself is omnipresent. And this is why remote viewing works the way that it works. Um, that we are able to, consciously see anywhere at any time. Um, and I've had maybe two or three experiences with astral projection, where I was actually almost like an OBE, like an outer body experience, where my spirit self or whatever was pulled from me and into another area. And it's like you get butterflies all over, like you're at the top part of a roller coaster getting ready to come down. That excitement, that you can feel that coming out of you. And all the visions that I have, and even the astral projection, it was always in blue. Everything would always be highlighted in even the apparition that I had visit me was also in blue. But these people in these places that I see during these moments, they're always like highlighted in like a neon blue with like the details and like darker shades or hues of blue. And I don't know if that's how, I'm not sure why that is, but that's also commonly reported. That's, maybe that's just how consciousness sees like that, things are in blue, or that's just how mine, I don't know. I actually don't know, but yeah, I totally 100%, believe in all of that stuff. Consciousness is, it's difficult until you experience it. Sometimes it takes personal experience to really drive matters home, because until you experience it, it, it's going to be hard for anybody to believe in. It'll be all very subjective, and there's no really objective empirical evidence that can say yes, this is 100%. We have data, to prove that this is true. So you really have to rely on the analysis of a community, of a collective that are all experiencing, the same thing. Yeah.
yeah. So have you ever had any situations where like you did kind of like freak out in public, like if voices were talking to you, or you thought somebody was, or something, anything like kind of like the gang stalking thing, where you thought people were following you, so you kind of like acted back on them or anything?
Yeah, especially before like this whole thing happened. Like, like I said, 15 months ago when it was like 24/7. But prior to that, when it would come and go, I was still stuck in that phase of thinking that it was happening outside of me. And as as you're going through these stages of fear and paranoia and you think people are following you, um, the voices are also they're following suit, like, oh man, I remember one time I was walking through Scranton, Pennsylvania, and they were
With the
telling me that they
opposite, right?
yeah, exactly,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And they were telling me that they had posted on, and this is just the kind of shenanigans that people have to deal with, but they were telling me that they had posted on Scranton's Facebook page, like I guess, some of the stuff that I had done in the past, like, oh, he was mean to his girlfriend, or he was a bad dad, like all these, like whatever, just anything you might feel like shit about, that they had posted that. So, and I'm hearing this and I'm believing it because I'm like, where the hell, where is this coming from? Like, how, and next thing you know, you're looking around like who, so anybody that you see that's on a phone, you're thinking that that's what they're looking at, and that they're going to be out there. And that's just how a lot of this, a lot of the psychosis works. These are the type of things that people are hearing. The police are going to come and get you. The FBI are out to get you. The CIA know. We see all your thoughts. Like these are the type of things that you're going to hear that are going to put you into these heightened states of fear and panic and make you think that people are out to harm you. You know.
Did you like go up to anybody and say anything? Like, have you ever confronted someone physically when this happens? Like,
Yeah, so one time I did. Yeah, I thought it was a guy that was maybe 200 yards away from me. And that's where the I heard the voice coming from. And he was saying like he wanted to fight me, or like, or he was just talking shit about me. And I got very, I've mellowed out a lot, but in that moment I was like, man, F this. Right? So I was like, I charged up to the guy. I was like, you got something to say? And he was like, what are you talking about? Like, and I felt really dumb. And I was like, I'm sorry, and I got really confused myself. And then I went back and like sat in my car and I'm like, what the hell is going, like what the heck is going on? And this would happen, it got to a point where this was happening, sober, not sober, like whatever. It was just became a part of life on and off, until I came into the realization 100% that none of it was happening within my environment.
yeah, so none of it's happening within your environment, but it is happening outside of your own brain, right?
Again, it's you have to look at your all right. So your brain perceives everything, right? You're hearing my voice right now, right? And it's coming through the speaker on your computer, but your brain is analyzing it. Your brain is the processing center for everything environmental. Everything that you see, everything that you touch, everything that you smell, everything that you taste, everything that you hear is processed in your brain, right? It's our sensory organs that perceive the environment and the world around us, but all of life is processed in in the brain, right? So when your brain is being manipulated, your perception is being manipulated, you know, it's not the same thing, but it is the same thing. The two kind of coincide, and that's where these states of psychosis come from, because it's very difficult to differentiate between one or the other. You really have to get to a point where you're able to separate what is, what is actually part of my environment and what is just part of my perceived environment. Yeah.
Okay, and then was there anything that happened to you, like you said, when you would hear words that you didn't know or places that you didn't know? Was there anything that happened to you that you can like specifically say, okay, like this voice told me something that like there's no way I wouldn't know. You know what I mean?
Um, so all right, so as far as all right, so here's a good example. And again, I don't know how this was done, but I was driving down the highway one time and one of the voices came in and said, the state constables are gonna get you. And I'm just a regular dude driving down the highway. But I'm like, what the hell is going on? but I'm in the slow lane. I just keep it moving. Well, 5 minutes later, a state constable comes up and passes on my left. So something like that happens, and you're like, immediately your brain's again making order of things, and you begin to think that the state constables are running some sort of like mind control tech or something, or using a speakerphone and blasting thoughts into your head to stay kind. I don't know how that. I don't know how they knew that, how they could have known that, unless it's an observation from up high that is watching, or but that's like one of a whole host of events. I didn't know who Rasputin. You know who Rasputin is?
Like I've heard the name, but I don't think I know who it is.
Yeah, I didn't know anything about Rasputin up until about 2 months ago, and then the voices started saying look up Rasputin, things like that. And then next thing I know, I'm online and I'm looking up things like Rasputin, Fibonacci sequence, like all of these all these things that kind of coincide with whatever your train of thought is at the at that present moment in time. And a lot of it's just a distraction. It's like, is there some relevance there? Probably. you know but you kind of got to get to the point where it's like, where does this end? Am I just going to be like these little 99% of what is said is all just kind of nonsense, with like 1% that it may be helpful, may not be helpful, but you'll cling on to that 1%, hoping for a better end result or expectation, as opposed to just moving on with your life and living a healthy, normal life with relationships, and creating good, positive memories for you and your family. Which for me, I decided to forget all that other crap and stay focused solely on being the person that my community and my family and my loved ones need me to be. And that, and that really is the ultimate message here for people that ever experience something like this, is to not get wrapped up in the bull crap that you experience with this sort of phenomena. Um, if you're meant to know something, you know, you'll know it when it's time to know it. But to live in a state of constant expectation, you're setting yourself up for constant disappointment.
Yeah. And then what is Rasputin?
Rasputin was a Russian mystic, um, who wound up working for like a very prominent, or became like a healer, like a religious healer, and occultist for like a very prominent Russian czar. And eventually he was executed. It's believed that they drowned him because of his mystic healing powers. Yeah. So, whatever that was intended to be, like, but what that will do is somebody will Google that, and they'll be like, oh, they're trying to teach me how to like have healing powers and heal people. And it's like, well, now you're living in a state of expectation again, and unfulfilled expectation. Like, this whole thing is meant to teach you how to be entirely yourself, right? How to come in tune with who you are, your own unique you, right? I shared on a video on TikTok this past week that, you know, um, your chances of being a human right now, right, is 1 in 400 trillion. The odds that a sperm found an egg and made a you is 1 in 400 trillion. The astronomical odds that you're even alive right now. I mean, to put that number into perspective, the odds of you winning the Powerball is 1 in 292.2 million, right? So we all came into the world with a multitude of winning Powerball tickets. Um, and if you can view that unique life as a key on a keyboard, right, where no key is any greater or of less value than the key beside it, but each is meant to play its own tune in order for the entire organ to be able to play appropriately a melody, right? And that's what this experience at its core really teaches somebody, is to find yourself within the balance and the own comfortability of you within your own skin, and to get yourself in tune and not try to mimic the tune of the key next to you. Not try to become somebody else, but to be who you are meant to be in this. And too many people run down rabbit holes and can crazy ass conspiracies, and completely lose sight of themselves with an experience like this.
Yeah. So we've gone over like 2 hours. If there's anything else you want to go over that we didn't talk about, let me know. Otherwise, we can just wrap it up.
Okay. Yeah, no, I'm fine. I thought that was like I mean you let me ramble on, which I, I appreciate. Yeah, no, thanks for, for asking me to come on the show and share my story. And um, if anybody comes across this and they know somebody or they themselves are experiencing something like this, don't hesitate to reach out. The Reddit community that I have is positive TI, positive target individual, positive TI. And I'm also on TikTok and YouTube. I'll send you the links for them if you want to put them up when you're going to post this video.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think it was good. I mean, I don't really mind when you go on because like you pretty much kind of just automatically covered everything that I want. I didn't really, I don't even really have to like think of like what I want to ask next. It's just kind of like
Yeah.
you just kind of like went over everything, which is good. It makes my job easier. So as far as the Reddit community, you have your own subreddit called Positive TI.
I do. Yeah. Yeah. So
Uh,
I started it 8 months ago because in my search for when I was going through this, in my search for um, you know, because for me, and again, it was because of the perception that I held towards it, and because again, I had my daughter on the way, so I was desperately seeking strength in this and finding it day after day, newfound strength and realizations and insight. Um, a lot of the other communities that I was on, they were just hung up on the torture and harassment and not finding value in any of this, So I started that subreddit and I made it so that, I completely limited the talk about technology because that never goes anywhere. I completely eliminated any fear-based rhetoric or dialogue on there or anything that might serve as a trigger for somebody else. And I kept it strictly about the psychology that goes on, with this sort of event and how to best overcome that so that we can come together and share our stories and share the statements that are being said, find commonality and similarity between the stories, and then utilize those that testimony and figure out how the next step that each one can acquire to get through this. I speak to entirely way too many people that have been stuck in the same thing for 16 years, 16, 20 years, still think their neighbors are out to get them. And it's like, how many times are you going to move? How many times are you going to move, dude? Like just sit down and deal with yourself. And so it's kind of like that, but and I'm not that harsh with people on there. I try to be very open-minded. And at the same time, you get a lot of anonymous assholes in that community that just want to come in and just say stupid stuff and diagnose people. And I don't put up with it. I just immediately ban them. So there's, I don't want to think anybody just has free speech to come in and start labeling everybody in there as crazy or schizophrenic and not come in there with an attitude of understanding and empathy. Like I immediately just ban those people like that. So what I did was I created a very safe space for people to come and listen to other seasoned individuals that have gone through this and gotten through it and are now living a totally normal, healthy, worthwhile life.
and what does the TI stand for?
Targeted individual.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's awesome that you're doing what you're doing. And it's like, is it doing pretty good in terms of numbers and stuff too and activity?
It's up to 400 and I don't invite anybody. Like I don't go out of my way to invite people. It's just, if they see it in somebody else's profile or a lot of times I'll cross post. And then so I think we're up to like 450 members, something like that now. And it's a great group of people. And it's a place where anybody can come at any time and know that they're not going to read any bullshit about the government, or about microwave technology, about directed energy weapons, about satellites invading their heads, about fMRI or any of that crap. Like all that crap is eliminated. Stay focused on, because in my experience, there's not enough tinfoil on this planet that can block your head from this, right? In my experience, the only way that somebody's going to be able to get through this is if they take the time to sit down and deal with themselves as an individual and quiet their own mind and come into a place of equanimity within themselves.
Yeah, it sounds like you're in a good place as far as that. And it's like, I feel like if we're gonna like obviously like the conspiracy theories and the technology, that type of stuff can be interesting to talk about, but it's like if it's not grounded in reality, then it's kind of like there's no purpose for it. And everybody talks about free speech and stuff, which I agree with free speech, but like especially on something like your subreddit, it's like if anybody's just able to go in there and like shit talk basically and like say the wrong thing or just like put people down, like that's not good. Like it's not
No,
doing any good by saying, "Oh, you're fucking crazy" or whatever. It's like
no.
if you have something valuable to say that's going to help, then go for it. But if you just let anybody say anything, it could just it's just bad for people basically. And that
Right. For all I know, you're some 14-year-old kid sitting in your mother's basement just looking to get your rocks off on somebody else's, hard time in life. So yeah, I don't tolerate it.
yeah, it's fucked up to do that. So yeah, so you already plugged everything. I think you already plugged all your stuff. But one thing I always ask at the end too is any movies, music, podcasts, TV shows, whatever that you're into. It can either be involving TI or not. I
Yeah.
ask just because I'm like personally, I listen to a ton of podcasts, and it's like if I want to hear more about this type of stuff besides what you're doing, is there anything good to check out?
Oh man. So let's see, like what would be a good movie to watch that would really get you to wrap your head around, what this can be like. Man, I cannot remember the name of it right now. So I should just do a quick Google search of it while I'm talking. As far as music goes, I've a lot of people will find podcast and any kind of relaxing music to be very therapeutic. With my experience though, I often got music stuck in my head. So I actually wound up having to stop listening to music for a while because it would play on 5 to 10 second repeated clips constantly over and over and over. I mean, all day, every day, over and over and over again. Like if it was Red Hot Chili Peppers Under the Bridge, I would hear it as if you had a tiny microphone up to my ear. Under the bridge, down to oh, just the same chorus over and over. It's enough to drive you absolutely insane. Um, so there's a movie where a group of guys they go on to I want to say it's an island where and they can actually see their own thoughts. See thoughts. And then the whole premise of the movie is them trying to chaos walking. If you get a chance, watch the movie Chaos Walking. All right. So the whole premise of that is they land on a planet, it's a distant planet, and above their heads is their actual what they're thinking, it's being spoken. And also is the visualization of what they're thinking. So like when they're dreaming, there's a dream state above their head, and anybody standing there can hear it and they can see it. And and the people within on the planet, they try desperately to hide their own thoughts, and it's like they're all walking around like, don't think, don't think, don't think. And that's a very good example of what somebody like, somebody that's going through this experience, what they have to deal with. You just trying to hide, trying to hide your thoughts to no avail.
Well, that's interesting. For some reason, when you brought that up, I can't even think of the name of the movie, but it's with Paul Dano and the guy who played Harry Potter, and they're like on an
Okay.
island. Do you know what I'm talking about? If you don't know what I'm talking about, it won't really matter. But I didn't even watch the whole thing. I just saw parts of it, but it kind of reminded me as if they were having like hallucinations or something. Like,
Yeah.
do you know what I'm talking about or no?
No, no, I've never seen that one.
Yeah. Um, yeah, yeah, I forgot. It was almost like what like they were hallucinating the whole time or something. I forgot. But anyways, and then as far as podcasts go, to like explain this type of because I also am interested in like I'm interested in the paranormal phenomena, but also like the consciousness stuff. And like we didn't really have
Yeah.
enough time to get into that, but kind of like explaining this. And it's like, there's the view, like I think I said before, there's the view that like all of this is just consciousness. But yeah, anyways, any type of podcast that like maybe kind of like go in to the psychology or the of what's going on with this type of stuff.
Oh
Or
man.
or just or just people, like you mentioned that lady. Because I mean I am interested in looking at that lady and anything else,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So, let me think, let me think, let me think. You know, I spend most of my time I spend reading on, and it's all on Reddit. Um and involved in all the communities that I'm involved with on Reddit. Getting other people's testimony because here's the reality, right? I don't find any more value in such subjective issues than the combined testimony of experiencers, right? So when you have 12 people that are all experiencing the same thing, right? I'm just a very random number there. And it doesn't matter what the subject is, but there's no empirical evidence for this. Well, there's something to that. Like there's some significance there to that combined testimony that this sort of thing occurs, and you don't find that anywhere else besides on outlets like Reddit. You know, so I try to I don't I stay away from anything on Facebook. It's just so commercialized and marketed, and but on Reddit you can really connect with actual experiencers, and you know, um, let's see. So I would say, like, as far as I listen to a lot of Alan Watts. I don't know if you know who Alan Watts is.
Yeah, yeah, he's like a philosopher, right, from like the
Yes.
60s or 70s. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean he's passed away now, so he obviously doesn't have any podcast, but a lot of his lectures from the past are on YouTube. And a lot of what he talks about completely resonates with this experience and being able to understand this experience and move through some of the more hellacious um phases of it, because it's definitely a phased sequence of events that you can get stuck in a certain phase. But if you can really start to cultivate an appropriate mindset, by listening to certain people like Alan Watts, or reading, I really got away from a lot of Christianity and started reading a lot of Buddhism. Um, and that really helped me keep a good head on my shoulders with this thing, and really helped me to to explain a lot of what was happening in my mind and be able to move through this much faster than somebody that just got stuck on Illuminati, Satanist, you know Judaist crap. That's you got to get eventually got to get to a point where you're tired of hearing all that bull crap and move on for something that benefits you as an individual.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like this is, the internet and podcasts and all that and what you're doing is a great place to get this out there. Because otherwise, so many people like just don't even like really know about this type of thing. So, so yeah. So thanks for coming on, and I'll
Yeah,
send you the links when they get posted, and then also if you ever want to come back on, just let me know.
yeah, I really appreciate it, man. Thank you for having me on.
All right, yeah. Thanks. Bye, guys.
All right, take care.